Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. Over the past 2 weeks, we saw both presidential campaigns kick into high gear, with both the Democrats and Republicans hosting their national conventions. And South Carolina played a big role in both of those. We speak with Meg Kinnard of the Associated Press to find out what role that was and what happened on the national stage. Also, we speak with economist Joey VonNessen about the state of the economy in South Carolina. Now for the latest from this week. The Republican National Convention took place this week and featured appearances from Governor Henry McMaster casting the roll call votes for the state, to former Governor Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott delivering primetime remarks on Monday.
There's one more important area where our president is right. He knows that political correctness and cancel culture are dangerous and just plain wrong. In much of the Democratic Party, it's now fashionable to say that America is racist. That is a lie. America is not a racist country.
In his remarks, Senator Tim Scott mentioned George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, derided the cultural revolution Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want, and also spoke of his own personal experiences.
Our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. And that's why I believe the next American century can be better than the last. There are millions of families just like mine all across this nation, full of potential, seeking to live the American dream. And I'm here tonight to tell you that supporting the Republican ticket gives you the best chance of making that dream a reality.
Also this week, Governor McMaster said the state will soon be approved for a $300 boost in unemployment benefits, a temporary measure since Congress has yet to act on a better solution.
But President Trump has initiated a plan. We're studying it. We want to participate, but we want to be sure that it helps our people, and we believe it will, but we want to be sure it doesn't leave us saddled with more debt, because as you know, our income is down. Way down. We'll have another report from the Board of Economic Advisors soon. I've advised that we not start a new budget with adding additional expenses when we come back in September, but keep that continuing resolution at last year's level.
And joining me now to discuss the national political conventions is Associated Press reporter Meg Kinnard. She's based here in Columbia. Hey Meg, how are you?
I'm great, Gavin. It's really good to be back with you here from my dining room.
Yes, great to see you there. I think the last time we talked was in June, so a lot has transpired since then, including the two political conventions, the Democratic National Convention last week and the Republican National Convention that's going on this week. And we have seen several South Carolinians play some prominent roles in both of those. And before we talk about the Republicans going on this week, I want to talk a little bit about Congressman Jim Clyburn, the House Majority Whip, who gave a speech on Monday evening, the first night of the Democratic National Convention. And I want to get your thoughts on just what he said and the importance of seeing Congressman Clyburn in that speaking role. It was only about a 3-minute long speaking role that was.
As we know, Congressman Clyburn is a fixture and the dean of the South Carolina Democratic Coalition here in the state. He's the highest ranking black member in the House. And he, from his powerful leadership position as the whip, brings a lot to the state in terms of attention, but also projects that he's been working on, like rural broadband, for example, recently. But for him to play a prominent role at that Democratic convention was not a big surprise. Congressman Clyburn's endorsement, not just in the South Carolina primary, but also in the presidential nominating contest overall, was highly sought after by all of these candidates. Having his buy-in for a campaign is huge. He obviously gave that buy-in to Joe Biden several days before our primary here back in February. But to see Congressman Clyburn speaking from a rooftop of a Charleston downtown hotel, the Dewberry that we all know and love, to see him showing off the city and to speaking about issues that are important to his constituents in South Carolina, brought the stage right here home to South Carolina and reminded the voters across the country of the role that this state really plays when it comes to picking presidential candidates and nominees on really both sides of the aisle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the big things that I remember hearing from his speech, again, like I said, it was a pretty short speech when you compare it to what we heard from Nikki Haley and Tim Scott later this week. But one of the big ones that he spoke about was about race relations. Obviously, he was standing, like you said, on top of that hotel balcony there, but also right nearby Mother Emanuel AME Church, where the tragic shooting happened 5 years ago. And he said, much like the country as a whole, we are stepping out from the shadows of our past and beginning to lay the groundwork for a more just future. It won't be easy. we can only succeed if we move together. Really speaking along those lines, I saw a lot of similarities between his speech somewhat when we're talking about race and race relations and that of Nikki Haley and Tim Scott's, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what role what chord, I guess, is Jim Clyburn trying to strike there for the Biden campaign specifically when we're looking at invigorating the black voting bloc of Democrats?
Joe Biden's whole campaign, he's talked about it frequently on the trail, was born out of the immediate aftermath of the Charlottesville violence from several years ago. And he's spoken about that frequently, and that is very much a centerpiece of his campaign, trying to repair what he sees as the divisions drawn in this country during the first several years of the Trump administration. So for Congressman Clyburn to be talking about those divisions that still exist and offering Joe Biden as the candidate who is best positioned to bring America together along those lines that are existent not just in the South, but in many cities across our country, for him to be really bringing Joe Biden in and saying, this is the man who can fix the hurt that we all have here in South Carolina and otherwise, that could really speak to a lot of voters who are looking for somebody that really can unite the country.
And Meg, when we look about, uniting the country there, I want to switch gears to a little bit to what we heard from Nikki Haley, our former governor, former U.S. UN ambassador to the United Nations for the Trump administration. What did you hear from her speech in terms of maybe uniting the country as well, or maybe how it differed from what we heard from Congressman Clyburn?
Sure. Nikki Haley, we all know her story, but for a lot of voters across the country, this really is one of those big opportunities for her to be introducing herself on a national scale. She told a lot of stories that we're familiar with about growing up in Bamberg, South Carolina, where she, as the daughter of Indian immigrants, experienced discrimination. She often says that she wasn't black, she wasn't white, but she was brown and never really felt like she fit in. So she was speaking to that diversity that, again, obviously Joe Biden and Congressman Clyburn want voters to be thinking about. But Nikki Haley is up there as a Republican saying, look, don't forget, there are plenty of people like me who represent diversity within this party. And so we could potentially be speaking to a lot of those issues in a very unique and personal way that not everybody can, but she said that she's the one who really does have those experiences that she can bring to the table as well.
And we saw some of, she obviously discussed Mother Emanuel, again, a big moment of her time as governor and for our state as a whole. It was a huge flashpoint. It was a tragic event that hit this state very hard. And she brings it up from time to time. It's a big speaking point for her because she did, she was guiding the ship. She was, the head of our state at the time when it happened. And she brings it up a lot. But at one point she spoke about it during her RNC speech, and it drew some criticism from one of the victims, one of their surviving members. It was Reverend Sharon Risher, whose mother, Ethel Lee Lance, was killed at Mother Emanuel. And after Nikki Haley spoke, Risher tweeted, "Nikki Haley needs to shut up about Emanuel 9. She did not do anything from her heart, all for show. She's a liar," essentially. So when you look back at that, and then we look back at, people saying that maybe enough wasn't done in the aftermath of Mother Emanuel, the flag came down. She mentioned the flag coming down, not by name, just that a divisive symbol came down. Do you think that that's going to maybe fall flat for some African-American voters who they're maybe trying to attract to the Republican Party?
It's going to continue to be a point of contention for black voters, but also maybe for others as well. Remember, former Governor Haley came under some criticism last year as well for an interview that she did in which the controversy around the flag came up, and she referred to it as a symbol of service, sacrifice, and heritage before it had been hijacked by the shooter at Mother Emanuel. Those are comments that drew her a lot of criticism by some, like Reverend Risher, who were saying that she was really trying to be opportunistic and talking about an incident that was very painful and perhaps, according to critics, portraying herself as really more of a force within, really wanting to bring that down. Obviously, the flag did come down during Governor Haley's tenure. Obviously, she did speak out and say it was time for it to come down. But assuredly, should she pursue a run for higher office or something else in the public sphere, there is going to continue to be a lot of comments and discussion about actually what happened in 2015 and the chronology there.
And it's also interesting because I know, cancel culture and, political correctness is just there's such broad terms. It's hard to really define, especially when, some people take them one way, other groups take them another way. We've heard a lot of discussion about cancel culture. We heard it in Tim Scott's speech. We heard it in Nikki Haley's speech. I'm going to quote this. There's one more important area where the president is right. He knows that political correctness and cancel culture are dangerous and just plain wrong. So it's really kind of a tricky balance, I found, that, when we're talking about bringing down a Confederate flag, which we heard from, Donald Trump Jr. later on that night say we need to stop, getting rid of monuments, you got to stop getting rid of our past, essentially. And then you talk about how, Nikki Haley called for that flag to come down. It's kind of a difficult line to walk. But like you were saying, she kind of used it, the terms that, this was stolen from us, essentially. This heritage was therefore co-opted by a murder. Is that going to be a difficult line to walk going forward when we talk about cancel culture as a whole? And, can she walk that line? Is she managing to do that here?
Certainly it will be something that Nikki Haley is going to have to navigate very carefully when she continues to occupy this very prominent role on the national stage. A political consultant that I talked to last year about exactly that. Can Nikki Haley really, appeal to some Trump supporters in a genuine way, but also appeal to perhaps more traditional mainline conservatives and Republicans in the same way, ones that she would surely need. And this consultant told me he saw Nikki Haley as a potential Goldilocks candidate, someone who's going to have to kind of, take a little bit here and there and find a happy medium. Mm-hmm. So yes, it is a difficult pathway for her to tread. She's been part of the Trump administration. There's no denying that, and has very early on voiced her support for President Trump's election for a second term. So there's no question there, but absolutely, issues like the flag, issues like that debate will be those that she's going to have to continue to discuss. Mm-hmm.
Difficult line to walk there, but one, again, very different from some of these other situations when we're talking about monuments and the like. So I want to talk about Senator Tim Scott there. He did mention George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, something that we didn't hear from a lot of other speakers when we're talking about these racial justice issues. Senator Scott was also at the forefront of legislation this past summer dealing with criminal justice reform. It got stalled out. He did mention that he blamed the Democrats in his speech, but Meg, I want to ask you a little bit more about what we heard in his speech overall and how it fit into the narrative of this week.
Sure. Tim Scott, obviously, like Nikki Haley, comes from a bit of a different perspective piece. He is the only Black Republican in the U.S. Senate, and he oftentimes talks about a lot of the personal difficulties that he's experienced. I believe it's the 18 times in the past 2 decades that he's been pulled over by law enforcement. He can speak to a lot of these issues that are experienced within the Black community with authenticity within the Republican Party, something that none of his colleagues can do. He also has said that he doesn't like just being come to talk about Black issues and just, discussing the things that are important to the Black community, saying, look, I think every issue is important to the Black community and otherwise, so that's who elected me. It's not just Black people, it's everyone in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. So Tim Scott obviously brings diversity into the Republican Party, and he did speak to some of that. But he also talked about his relationship with President Trump, with whom he has disagreed at times, but he has mentioned, look, opportunity zones, those are issues that are very important to me that I've worked on. The president supported it. Options for education for parents, that's important to me. The president has supported it. So Tim Scott, like Nikki Haley, seems to be the kind of candidate and politician who's looking at the Trump administration, acknowledging that there are perhaps some things with which they don't agree, but in those areas on those issues that they, with the president's support, they're willing to sit with him and work on those things. And that's something that could be appealing to voters at a higher level as well.
Yeah, and he definitely had probably the biggest line of the night and maybe somewhat of the week so far when he was talking about his own personal family and their narrative there when, you put it in the context of the American dream, essentially. He's saying, our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime, and that's why I believe the next American century can be better than the last. So really kind of striking that, the hopefulness chord there as they're trying to make, give that hope for broad diversity within the party itself and grow that diversity. So we'll see how that maybe pans out going forward, because again, 2016 we saw Donald Trump only get about 8% of African American voters. So I think there might be a play there for attracting some more going forward. We don't know until we see those exit polls in 2020 in November, Meg. But really quick, I want to get your thoughts on if this was an audition for 2024 going forward. I mean, we had a lot of big names out there from South Carolina. Obviously, Jim Clyburn's not running for president, but when you look at Tim Scott, you look at Nikki Haley, what does the future hold for them, and what does this these big speaking parts mean for them?
It really could be seen as an audition by some people. A lot of those anecdotes, the one that you mentioned from Senator Scott most recently, we've heard them. We've heard them all before. These have been part of these candidates' stump speeches within South Carolina. But this is their opportunity to introduce themselves to people outside South Carolina. And as we both know from having been on that trail for 2020, beginning in 2018, these presidential races really do begin very early. So who knows exactly what's ahead for Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, but certainly there's something perhaps brewing, and it is really going to be, this is very, a good opportunity for them to tell their story to a national audience. And again, we see South Carolina in centerpiece on a national stage. We're not a battleground state, as I wrote the other day, but it is possible for a state like this to get that kind of attention, and they certainly had it during the Republican convention.
Definitely did. Well, Meg, thank you very much for catching up with us. That's Meg Kinnard with the Associated Press. She's a political reporter based here in Columbia. Thank you, Meg.
Good to be with you.
Joining me now to discuss South Carolina's economy is research economist Dr. Joey VonNessen of the University of South Carolina Darla Moore School of Business. Joey, great to have you back.
Thanks, Gavin. Always great to be with you.
Yeah, very great. Well, Joey, it's been a couple months since we last spoke. I want to get your take on where things are right now, and when we look at the state's economy, are things doing better or worse than you thought they would be at this point now in late August?
Well, things are doing better, and I think the word to use is stability. Our pace of recovery definitely has slowed from a fairly fast rise in terms of what we call a V-shaped recovery pattern. We've shifted more towards a U-shaped recovery pattern, which is more slow and steady growth. But that is likely to continue into the fall months. But if we look overall at the recovery that we've seen so far, South Carolina has gained back about 54% of the jobs that were lost. We've seen an unemployment rate drop from 12.8% to 8.6%. So we are making a lot of progress, but we're likely to see a more slow and steady approach for the rest of 2020. And of course, different sectors are rebounding it at different rates. It's certainly not uniform across the board at this point.
And when you look at those different sectors, obviously, I'm guessing you're talking about maybe hospitality and tourism taking a longer time to come back than what, manufacturing, or what other sectors are maybe showing some bright spots?
Well, right now, if we look at the areas that are growing at the fastest rates versus less so, particularly when we look at job growth, you see a big divide between jobs that are higher wage, higher skilled positions versus lower wage, lower skilled positions. And the real dividing line there is, does a given job require some form of education beyond high school? If the answer is yes, then the recovery is progressing pretty nicely. If the answer is no, not so much. And to put a fine point on that, if you look at overall job growth in these two categories, job growth is up year to date by about 4% for higher wage, higher skilled positions. It's down close to 10% for the lower wage, lower skilled positions. So it's definitely industry specific and specific to the type of job as well.
Can you even pinpoint, when we look at those lower skill jobs, can you pinpoint really what it's tied to? I mean, is it really going to be those social distancing measures, those measures until we basically have a vaccine, that industry, for example, won't be coming back? I mean, is that maybe a ripe time for someone who's maybe watching this, who's in one of those stuck positions right now, to think, hey, maybe I should go to a technical college and get a degree in maybe advanced manufacturing or something that's maybe moving a little bit more upward at this time?
Yes, that's exactly right. The industry that's been hit hardest is leisure and hospitality. So we lost about 50% of the jobs in April compared to where we were in April of 2019. Now that sector is only down about 20%, which is still bad, but it's a sizable improvement from where we were back in April. But that's typically where we've seen the most layoff activity, the most loss of employment. So going forward, as we look towards the recovery, yes, if we look at industries that have been required to engage with in-person interactions, those are the ones in general that have been the hardest hit, and those are going to just slowly recover over time as we head through the rest of this year and into 2021.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, we did see that record high of unemployment in April. We've started to bring it down. We saw it go from, I think it was 8.7% in June to 8.6% in July. So really kind of, are we hitting some sort of floor in your opinion when we see maybe that this economy, this recovery is going to be a little bit longer than we maybe anticipated? Or what are those numbers showed you when you see that negligible difference between those 2 months right there?
Well, I think that just reflects the reality that the recovery is going to be slow and steady over time. The V-shape, or that bounce back that we saw during the early summer, was largely simply the result of the fact that we fell so far so fast. We saw this shutdown, and as the economy reopened, many of these sectors that just simply weren't operating went back to work, saw their employment numbers rise, and so that's where we've seen this benefit. So 54% of the jobs that have been recovered in South Carolina is a pretty quick turnaround. If you compare that to the Great Recession, it took us 5 years to regain 100% of the jobs that we lost in the aftermath of the financial crisis. So we're doing a lot better. It's likely to be a shorter total recovery period overall. But yes, I think it's going to be much slower going forward, simply because you tend to recover faster initially, particularly after a major shutdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it looks like right now there's about 141,000 people in South Carolina who are still receiving benefits. We have seen those numbers of unemployment benefit claims go down week by week for the most part, so that is encouraging news there. Are there any other encouraging numbers that you're looking at? I mean, I've seen some numbers when it comes to, new home starts, and, durable goods have been going up, and we saw some retail numbers. I'm wondering if that's something that people have really been focusing on when we start looking at like the bones and the stability of our economy going forward.
Well, retail is doing better. Consumer spending is getting stronger. Yes, the housing market has been doing exceptionally well. They're actually breaking records right now in terms of sales activity. So those industries continue to do strong. If you look at e-commerce, that's moving in the right direction. And manufacturing is stabilizing a lot as well and is doing better, which is great news for South Carolina. And I would say going forward, if we look more long run, so let's say 1 to 2 to 5 years out, even though 2020 has been a rocky year, I'm very bullish on South Carolina as a whole, because we have a number of competitive advantages that are not going away. Everything from our strength in terms of a low cost of living to strong natural amenities that draw people to South Carolina, particularly as they're looking to flee some of the major cities. And of course, we have a strong, diverse industry sector, particularly advanced manufacturing, which is poised to continue to be strong in the next decade. And the Port of Charleston aids that as well. The other industry, too, if we look at the transition more to e-commerce and the need for more distribution hubs for population centers, South Carolina benefits there as well. We've heard that Walmart just recently announced the distribution center in Charleston, and that's going to be a jumping off point for distribution to the entire southeastern United States, which is going to be seeing a bulk of the population growth in the United States over the next decade. So South Carolina really is well positioned for the future, even though 2020 has clearly been a rough year for everyone.
Yeah, you're talking about the ports, and they said they've seen about 70 blank sailings so far this year. That's, ships that just didn't make their schedule, didn't come into port. But it still sounds like things are ticking up a little bit for the new fiscal year, which started in July. They were going into a really strong year until obviously the pandemic took its toll. So I guess there's, again, when we start looking at the foundation of our economy, we still have some of those bright spots. It's just a matter of how long it will take for them to come back. But Joey, I want to get into something really quick. When we're talking about these metrics and when we look at these trends, do you feel like Wall Street is in sync with Main Street? Is it ever in sync with Main Street? Or, I mean, when we look at the stock market specifically, I mean, the stock market is just booming right now, but do the folks on Main Street feel that as well when we're talking about 141,000 South Carolinians who are still getting jobless benefits?
Well, no, many of them don't. And it's a very interesting question because it really is quite bizarre when you just compare stock market performance to GDP growth, because we are literally coming out of the worst quarter of GDP growth in our history at the same time that we're seeing the best stock market in our history. Those two things are happening at the same time, so it's very unusual. One reason for that has been Fed policy, which has continued to provide stimulus in order to help propel this recovery. And so the stock market has reacted to that, and I think that's been a good thing. I think we would be no doubt in much worse shape if the Fed had not taken proactive steps. So I think the fact that the stock market is doing well is a positive thing. But yes, you're absolutely right that does not always translate to, certainly not to every industry. And it does create this divide. And I think, again, the way to see that, especially in the job market, is to look at the lower skilled, lower wage jobs versus the higher skilled, higher wage jobs. And that's really where the divide is in terms of who's recovering at the fastest rate right now.
Joey, we have a minute left, and I want to get this question about Boeing. You've been following their progress, North Charleston. They've been having some rough quarters, not only because of 737 MAX issues, but also because of just international pressure. International demand on air travel has just gone completely down. It's going to be multiple years until they get back to where they were in 2019 at those levels, which as a result has led Boeing to cut the number of 787 Dreamliners they'll be producing, both in total here in North Charleston and in Washington. And it's led them to discuss not only, widespread layoffs, but also possible consolidation. I just want to get your thoughts on what that could mean to North Charleston. Do you think we're better positioned to get maybe the consolidation happening here, or what would happen if, those jobs did leave South Carolina?
Well, I think we're in a good position to be competitive for those jobs. And so if that consolidation happens, I think there's a good chance it does happen in South Carolina, which would be a win for the state, even though clearly not good news for consolidation from the perspective of Boeing. But yes, that could definitely help South Carolina. There are multiple factors that go into that decision, so we'll really have to wait and see. Costs play a huge role, which would be an advantage for South Carolina, but also the labor needs and the supply chain. And South Carolina is competitive there, but perhaps slightly less well situated compared to the advantages that we offer for lower costs. So I think we can be competitive. It's certainly possible, but again, we really don't know, but it would definitely be a win for South Carolina if they were to consolidate in Charleston.
And I think we'll be finding out maybe within a month is what I've been hearing in terms of when that report might be coming out from Boeing. So research economist Dr. Joey VonNessen with the University of South Carolina Delaware School of Business. Always good to see you, sir. Thank you for your time. To stay up to date throughout the week, check out the South Carolina Lead. It's a podcast that I host, and we talk about state news and the latest COVID-19 news affecting South Carolina. We drop it multiple times each week, and you can find it wherever you find podcasts and southcarolinapublicradio.org. For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.